Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships. Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I have entitled this podcast, Single and Owning It. When I talk about relationships, much of the time I talk about how to relate to someone else. And on occasion, I will spice it up with talking about how to relate to yourself and some of the cause and effect things that happen in relationships, not only to yourself, but, with other people. And a lot of what we do, the genesis of how we experience other people is because of what we put out there. And, they give us a reaction, a response to who we are. So for single people, there is a perception oftentimes that single people are miserable. And maybe they are. Sometimes it's that way because single people are in the process of looking to be with someone, looking for a mate. Maybe you put it out there to your friends. Hey, I'm looking for someone to date. And there's a lot of that conversation that happens. So, okay, the perception is sometimes single people are just miserable. And now that isn't always the case. But for those people who are in relationships, the perception, because, they were single before they got in a relationship, and because they were on that path or on that journey to look for someone, sometimes we have it in our heads that all the single people in the world are looking for someone to partner up with. And what does that mean? They get together and they stay together for a while and decide if they want to take the next step. And, there's a progression there. But if you are single, just on your own single, people who are in relationships, like I say, they have that perception of where they think you want to go with that. And it has to do with those individuals or in those couples owning their own story and wanting something good for you. So if you are single, their perception is, wow, you must not want to be, and you must be miserable because you're single. Well, the single and owning it part, and this is what the gist of this is about, is being able to be single and being comfortable in that. Now, I was given the inspiration to talk about this subject because someone dear to me pointed out that they went to a wedding. She went to her daughter's wedding, probably a couple of months ago. And being single, at this point in time in her life, she ran into a lot of people that she has known for a number of years. And her ex was there. Now the ex has reconnected. He's in a marriage, and she felt a little out of place at the wedding, because what happens at weddings? People are getting married there, and you have lots of people who are, they're celebrating people coming together and building a life together. But if you're single in a situation like this, a lot of times people look at you, they ask you about your situation, and they seem to have this angst, this pity for you. Now, there are lots of reasons why people are single. Some are involuntary. Maybe if you are in a relationship with someone and your significant other is no longer around, maybe they passed away or something like that. Yeah, that's sort of a situation that you have to deal with in its reality And, there's sadness around that loss. But, that's not everything there is in life. That is being in a relationship with someone else. But back to my example of when you're in these places like weddings, let's say you go to your high school reunion or your college reunion, and marriage is a step in life. It is one of those things in terms of the progression of life that we've come to embrace. I mean, it's sanctioned. It's done so in our laws, in our religions, things like that. I mean, that's good stuff. But if you're not married, and even if you're happy, it's interesting how when people relate to you, say they ask you that question, say they don't know your status, and they ask you, and they might even say, they may even say it this way, hey, you're not married yet? And they say it with that sort of that question in their voice, like, is there must be something wrong with you? Are you okay? You see, it's hard to push back against stuff like that. And owning who you are at those moments is just as important as at any other time. I mean, you don't have to go and make excuses for being single. I mean, that's the worst thing to do, because it starts that chain of event on the whole pity thing. Yeah, you can give your story, but people, they sense the pain when you're fumbling for an excuse as to why your situation is. I mean, it's okay. Enjoy your status. But having been in that situation where you kind of get that look as if something is wrong because you are solo, you are by yourself, you are on your own, you are fully self-supporting kind of thing, that gives some people lots of trouble to be able to grasp that on both sides. Even single people trying to explain their status, sometimes they go through a lot of pain to do that, and to try not to make people who are asking the question feel uncomfortable for asking, because you could imagine that awkward moment. Like I said, they say, where's your husband, or something like that, or where's your wife? And you say, well, I'm not married. And so, I'm sorry, we didn't know. It used to be very traditional that people wore wedding rings, and you could see someone's status without having to say anything. But that was just the tradition. Some people don't have that kind of symbology anymore. They're in a relationship. They know they're married. They've done all the legal stuff, and they're comfortable with that. So there are those kinds of situations. But as well, going back to those people who choose to be single, they don't have to be in a relationship. You don't have to be in a relationship with someone in order to feel whole. And in fact, many people, given the opportunity to have a do-over, would probably say the best thing you can do for yourself is find yourself before you get into a relationship with someone else. Because when you get involved with someone, then your life takes a trajectory that you may not have calculated. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, not at all. But sometimes you don't know yourself before you get into these situations. So being single definitely has its advantages. I'm going to talk about that. And specifically to those people who are single and who are listening to this podcast, and to those people who aren't, who wonder about people who are single. And when I say single, I mean someone that is not in a relationship. And I want to differentiate that from, as I kind of alluded to a little bit ago, I want to differentiate that from someone who, say, may have been in a partnership and their partner has passed away. That's different. That's not a voluntary thing. That's sort of an involuntary, well, not sort of, I mean, it's an involuntary thing, and you now have something to have to deal with. The grief and the pain of losing your significant other. So I'm going to take a break, and I will come back and I'll talk about this some more.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And we're back. This is John Johnson, the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm talking about being single and owning it. So again, I want to talk about the inspiration of why I'm talking about this subject. And it was a conversation I had with somebody who had gone to a wedding. She'd gone to her daughter's wedding. She's a beautiful person, great personality. She's loving. She's single. And when she was at the wedding, her daughter's wedding, she obviously had met lots of people there who some she was familiar with. And you know, they existed on both sides of the family, people that she knew, people that were family of the groom. And, you know, people tend to ask questions about your status. Well, when the question came to her about her life and was she married or had she remarried, because her ex was there. So had she remarried? And her answer was no. It's the look that on people's faces when they kind of have that, oh, well, I don't know what to say next sort of thing. And if you're the person trying to answer them, then you might have this really strange feeling of, oh, wow, I guess I feel out of place. Maybe they think I'm not normal because I'm not in a relationship with somebody. I'm single. I'm not married. All of that. See, all of these things start spinning in your head. And it's part of it is that internal critic. And I explained a little bit about the setup on that. Is marriage is one of those progressions in life that when we reach that, that's sort of the top step in all of the steps. It's sanctioned by religion. It's a beautiful thing. But if that is not what you see for yourself, the thing here is you have to be able to own who you are, embrace that, and love you for who you are. It's great if you understand that you don't want to be in a relationship, in a marriage, because being single is okay. You have to learn to accept yourself. You have to be okay with that part. And that in and of itself is a journey. Something that I talked about in the very first segment is it's really important to know who you are before you get involved with someone else, especially in some sort of in a permanent and a long-term relationship. Now, obviously, relationships give you opportunities for that discovery of who you are. It's really being in a relationship when you can learn a lot about yourself. But this is so there's no denial about that. But this is the part of you being okay with who you are. And when those questions come to you, don't feel as though you have to give an excuse, because you don't. I mean, there's really no story that you would want to make up in those situations. Be comfortable with who you are. Because like I said, part of what you're dealing with is the perception of what other people have and their expectations. Now, if you've been one of these people who has been single a long time and you are lamenting the fact that you're single, then yeah, you're gonna get those reactions. So that's something that you don't want to be doing. You want to be on your path to discovering yourself. And like I said, you can remember if you have been single and then you get into a relationship, you tend to think everybody wants that. Everybody wants what you want. So that's why they're saying some of the things that they're saying to you. And then they have that reaction, or they make the statement to you, and then there's this strange thing that's happening where, okay, well, we don't know what to say next. What you have to do is you have to own the fact that you're single, enjoy you for who you are and the journey you are taking, the self-discovery that happens during all of this. And you don't have to see that you're being single because you are preparing to be with someone else. That's not your goal here. Your goal is really part of the self-discovery, owning who you are, having the freedom to do what you want, when you want. That's one of the benefits here. You don't have to answer to somebody else. You don't have to feel guilty that if you do something that you might be leaving your partner behind, because when you're single, you have the freedom to do that. It takes a lot of confidence to be single and to own it because of so many expectations that society has for people in order to pair up. Now, that's not to ignore the benefits of being in a relationship, because we're not denying, I'm not denying that part. What I'm really here, again, trying to emphasize is the strength that it takes to be single and to own it, and why you want to own it. I mean, think about this. Reinventing yourself takes a lot of courage. And by the reinvention, I'm talking about examining who you are, taking things apart, and trying new adventures, just being bold and not really worrying about the outcome. It doesn't have to be perfect. Let's say you decide that you want to take an art class, and you're not going to be a Picasso or be a Monet. You're just going to strike out there and see what it is to do some art and to get in touch with whatever is that's creative about you, whatever inspires you. And these are the kinds of things that you can own. So when you get the question of, why aren't you married? Or, wow, doesn't being single suck? Because people will actually ask that question, again, as if to explain that for them, life is a progression and being married is at the top step. And for some people, it isn't. You might have to explain, or maybe you can, or don't have to explain it, but being single is not the same as being lonely. Let me say that again. Being single is not the same as being lonely. And I think I should also emphasize that being single is a choice. Now, you can find somebody to be with if you want to. You don't have to be on your own, be by yourself. You can find a partner. And, it's being involved in a relationship if you're not married. And that's the distinction I'm making here, because as it were, in this example, this was somebody who went to a party, met a lot of people who had been in long-term relationships. And might I add, this person I'm talking about, she'd been in a long-term relationship. But when that relationship ended, then she had been in a couple of other relationships that had lasted some length, but because those didn't really bring about the kind and quality of relationship that she wanted, she chose not to continue it. And, that's to her benefit, or to anybody in that situation, that's their benefit. So being single, and in this case, being single was a choice that she made, and she's very comfortable with it. And I think anybody in that particular circumstance would be, because this person is very independent. They have their way of thinking. They like being on their own. They like not having to answer to someone else. And those are some of the benefits of being single. Not that answering to someone is bad. Remember, this isn't a bad or good or bad kind of thing. This is really about knowing where, when you're in a relationship and you choose to be, you do it because you want to be there. You want to share your life with somebody because you want to, and I don't mean to use the word answer to as if it's subservient, but you want to be there for your partner as much as you would want them to be there for you. But when that partnership doesn't exist for you, that's okay. That's what being single is about. You get to fill in all the blanks the way you want to. I'm going to take a break, and I'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, talking about single and owning it. Now, during the break, I was reviewing a couple of my notes, and one of the things that I realized that I hadn't actually specifically said was, I've talked about long-term relationships, and I was speaking specifically at the time of being married. But there are many, many people out there that have been in a long-term union with somebody, and they just haven't decided to get married. They probably have lived together, but they've at least been in each other's life a long time. And I've known, and in fact, I still know somebody or people that have been in long-term relationships. I talked to my neighbor, say maybe, a couple of weeks ago, and she's in her 70s, and she's been with the same guy for 20 years. Now, they don't live together. She has her place, he has his, but they are still a couple. And they've been, like I said, they've been seeing each other regularly for 20 years, and I'm sure they treat each other like a married couple. They just live in separate places. So would you consider her single? Yeah, from a purist standpoint, because she's not married. But from the place of if she were at a social gathering and somebody were to ask her how she felt about her relationship, I'm sure she would feel just as significant and important because of that. Now this is a bit off the, this is on a tangent as to what I was talking about before, because when I was speaking of single, I was specifically talking about somebody who is not in a relationship per se. But this is a little bit of an example of one in which this person is in a relationship, but they're not married. And that was another one of the distinctions I was making, because in my illustration of what the inspiration was to having this particular topic was because somebody had gone to a wedding and she's single and she received a lot of questions and she felt a little uncomfortable because the reaction that she got from people was one that seemed like they were feeling pity. And because that made her feel uncomfortable, she came back a little depressed. And I said, you should not feel bad about who you are just because other people have a perception of you. And I want to go the direction here of saying, you better really be careful about letting other people's perception of you shape your thoughts of who you are. Because many people are misguided and they live to the beat of a different drummer. Or maybe said differently, you live to the beat of a different drummer. And because you are living your life, you're going the trajectory that you want to go, you have a different experience to live into or to embrace. And that's just as significant as their lives are for them. See, this makes me think of when somebody approaches you and asks you about your status, that you learn very quickly what other people's perceptions and expectations are, very quickly. And the thing not to do is to make pitiful excuses as to why you are who you are. Don't do it, because the feedback loop that's going to happen in these situations is you're going to be pitied. And that's certainly not what you want. The thing that happens in these cases is you may not have found somebody that you want to be in a relationship with in that way. So therefore, settling for just anyone for appearance's sake isn't a really positive choice, is it? It's not. So that's not one you want to do. You want to make choices in the people that you have in your life, positive choices. Now, here's the thing that happens when, let's say you create a dating profile. And I would say the majority of the people who are on the websites, and I'm talking those who are single, who are looking to meet with somebody, the majority of the people who are single are probably have been divorced, especially if they're a little older. They've been in a relationship, they've been divorced. At least that's what I've seen. And think about those profiles in which the person says, never been married. And let's say that person is, say, 50 or older. Never been married. What's the perception you have of that individual? You might think that there's something wrong with them. Now, if you're a person who has actually experienced that never been married thing, you can relate right away. You don't come out saying, well, that person must be damaged. There's something wrong with them. Why have they never been married? Why have they not aspired to do that? Well, those are questions that a lot of people think about. But until you've been in their shoes, then why would you say something is wrong with them? So if you're that person, don't assume there's something wrong with you. You will get the question of, why have you not been married? And there could be a lot of answers to that. Maybe you're one of these individuals, like I gave the illustration of my 70-year-old neighbor who has had a boyfriend for 20 years. She's not married. Technically, she's not married. She is single. But for the sake of the podcast and explaining the distinction here, she is in a relationship, but she's single. But I'm going to jump back to the part of the individual who's single, who is not in a relationship, knowing that you are not damaged. You are somebody who is freed up to do what you want to do, and you should be able to enjoy who you are, and you're going to get the questions. And if you do, you can choose to answer or not. I mean, think about what you would want people to know of you in those circumstances, and know that if you say, I'm not in a relationship, because maybe you're at a social situation and your significant other isn't there. So they wouldn't know that until they ask, especially if they're somebody who's been out of contact with you for an extended period of time, because people's lives change. And with that having been said, when you answer, how are you going to answer? How are you going to feel about yourself? Now, you can decline not to answer these questions, but eventually it's something that is going to come up. And feeling good about yourself really matters when you answer these questions. Because we all get a sense of the energy when somebody doesn't have a lot of esteem, a lot of self-esteem. Because they tend to shrink down and they tend to make excuses or to apologize or something of that nature. And that can't make you feel good about who you are. And like I said, it evokes pity from other individuals, only because they're not trying to do it in a condescending sort of way, but they just feel like, oh, it must be terrible to be lonely or something like that. And maybe you don't feel any of that. You just feel awkward trying to answer these questions of people. Like I said, you don't have to answer. But think about it. Think about all the positive things that happen in your life. Not just because you're single, but because of who you are. You may not always be single. From this point forward, maybe you are on that trajectory and you will meet somebody soon. But for the moment, you are who you are. And I think embracing that is what you should be doing. Accept yourself. Learn to love yourself. That's one of the best pieces of advice I could give you. Learn to love and accept yourself. I'm John Johnson, and this is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I've been talking about being single and owning it. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.